Disney princes don't usually get a lot of attention, do they? Not that they aren't important characters for the story in which they exist, but quite often they can be overlooked, particularly in the early days with stuff like Snow White and Cinderella. But that doesn't mean there aren't things to appreciate in those stories. Cracked, of course, has come along to tell us just how these princes are bad role models for boys because, after all, we should totally treat Disney characters as role models. Yeah, I know this video is about 5 years old, but I watched it, and while I think it's really dumb and obviously meant for chuckles more than anything, although I didn't really laugh all that much at this, although, again, to be fair, some of the things they say are genuinely funny, I think there is something we could take from this, so let's hear what they have to say. Let's do it.
Hi. Sometimes when I feel lonely, I sit in my car for a while before going into the house and imagine I have a family waiting for me inside that I'm trying to get away from. Then when I remember I live alone and I'm childless, I feel relieved to be alone. You should try it, it's great.
You know, as someone who dreams of the day that I can have a wife and children, a family of my own to care for and in turn care for me, someone who's happy to welcome me home when I'm exhausted and worn down, to children who look up to me as a role model and protector the way I see my own father, and a wife who loves me and depends on me like I depend on her. I have tried and currently live the lonely life. It's not great. It's pretty miserable.
I don't have kids because I stress out about how my kids would grow up messed up because the world is messed up. Like, can you imagine raising a son right now with the unrealistic expectation that Disney sets for men? I mean, it just makes me sad when I think about how my son will have no cartoon role models to look up to in Disney movies.
Okay, I get it. She's joking here. I get the joke. It's fine. It's a funny joke. I got it. But I want to address this more seriously. What she's saying here is basically she wants real good, like, cartoon Disney male role models for her boys. Okay. Seriously. I have worked in the education system for over 5 years now. I've worked in the high school level, the middle school level, elementary level. I've even given a few lectures in a college. I've seen boys and girls of every age. I've seen the way they grow, the way they learn, the way they take information, the way they process it, the way they play, the way they interact. I've seen a lot of stuff. Okay, and I'm not saying by any means that I'm an expert, but take this from what I've experienced and seen. From what I've seen, young boys, particularly in the elementary school age where they would be watching these kind of Disney movies, definitely need good male role models. Not necessarily animated role models, I mean real male role models. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I feel bad for a lot of young boys growing up in today's society. True story, I was subbing for a 4th grade class, and I was subbing for the class for 3 days. On the first day, we were taking them out to recess, and the boys were playing soccer. A ball went flying, and it hit a little girl on the head. Now, she wasn't hurt. She was shocked more than anything. But the teachers freaked out and canceled soccer for the rest of the week. I asked the teacher later, while the kids were inside doing their work, I asked a teacher later, do you think that was necessary? And she said, they should never have put those goalposts up there because, quote, it only riles up their aggressive tendencies, acting as if the boys had intended to hit the girl. I was baffled. I was like, what? They didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. They were very apologetic, but they were punished. All of them were punished, and soccer was taken away from them. They were miserable for the rest of the time that I was with them because they couldn't play soccer. In another instance, let me see, I was subbing for a 2nd or 3rd grade class. I can't remember exactly, but it was very young kids. I was subbing for the class for the day. And I remember the little boys were desperate to get my attention. They wanted to show me, like, their art, their class work, their homework, pictures of their dogs or their families. They wanted to share stuff with me, get my opinion on it. They wanted praise. One of them would come to me often saying, look at this problem. Did I do it right? Did I do it right? And I'd say, yeah, you did it right, man. And it would make him smile, this big toothy smile. He was so happy to get that praise. And I said, why don't you ever show your teacher? And he said, well, usually she just tells us to sit back down. And if we don't, she yells at us. Now, of course, I'm sure there's some context. There's some nuance. But some of these kids, some of these young boys look scared to approach teachers. And some of them, I feel like, get punished for when they act like little boys do. There's this stigma that's been going around about this whole idea about, boys will be boys is a wrong thing to say, but boys, I find, learn differently than girls. They behave differently from girls, and that's not a bad thing. This whole idea about toxic masculinity in kids, it's a myth. Boys can be raised to be absolutely wonderful individuals if you give them the proper role models and the proper education. And I have a feeling that and not necessarily, I don't want to say a war, but war is a decent way to describe it, on young boys, trying to force them to not be what they naturally are. And when you try to force young boys to behave in a way that is contrary to their very nature, they will rebel more often than not and become even worse. A lot of the young men that I see in high school that I either taught or currently sub for act like punks and hoodlums and disrespectful jerks to not only me and the other teachers, but to their peers. And I'm willing to bet the reason why is because growing up, they were told constantly that they were punks and hoodlums and jerks. And so rather than try to defy the norm, they just said, fine, we're going to live up to your expectations. I see it a lot because a lot of these boys that I see in the elementary school age want attention. They want to compete. They want to have fun. They want to play. And some of them are hungry to learn. But if you put them down long enough, eventually they stop caring because they feel like they can't please anyone. No one cares about their success. No one cares about what they're trying to accomplish. I feel really bad for a lot of young boys in today's society. So even though I know she was joking about this, I say this with the utmost sincerity. I want young boys to grow up with strong male role models. I mean that. I was very fortunate. I grew up with wonderful parents and wonderful sets of teachers who really raised me well and helped to inspire me and push me, and I turned out better for it. But I worry for a lot of these boys that I see in the school system now, because as my brother calls them, and I agree, some of them are prison prep. Some of them, their only fate outside of school is the prison system. And it's harsh. Not because of race, not because of gender, but because these kids have been neglected. Told that they can't be who they naturally are. Now, I'm not saying that you should let a boy who roughhouses all the time get away with fights in school. That's not what I'm saying. You guide them. You properly nurture them in the right direction to know where to push that aggression. Because here's the way I see it. If you cancel soccer, where are those boys going to put that competitive, assertive edge? Where are they going to put that aggressive energy? I promise you, it will go places you don't want it. Sorry I went on that rant there. I know that was a lot, but I thank you for bearing with me. All right, back to the silly.
People talk about how Disney princesses set unrealistic expectations for women all the time, but nobody's talking about how the men are just as bad, if not worse. First of all, they're all boring, except for maybe Aladdin.
Do you trust me?
I mean, I want to trust you because your hairless sculpted abs are so dreamy, but I can't trust you because you lied to Jasmine about your identity. But at least you have an identity, so that's a pretty good start. Quick, name 3 Disney princes and 3 things you like about their personality.
All right, let's see the ones you put up here. Well, on the far left, we've got Prince Florian from Snow White. Well, I like the fact he took initiative. You know, Florian heard Snow White singing and not only went in to investigate the singing, but joined in on the song. And when that made her uncomfortable, rather than walking away dejected, he decided to sing some more to her to show he was not dangerous and, in fact, was quite attracted to her. This put Snow White into a more accepted state of mind, and, I mean, let's think about it. The dude could have walked away from the scene, but he took action. He was curious. He went in and took point. You got to give him credit. And then we have, well, that's Prince Henry from Cinderella. Okay, let's ignore the sequel Cinderella movies and look at him in just this first one. We can see that he's got a lot of patience, but still respects his father. He's clearly unamused with this whole ball situation and his father's obvious attempts to get him to find a wife. I mean, he even gives his father a disapproving look as if to say, Dad, you know I don't like this. But he's still obedient enough to go through with it. He's stoic, poised, and perhaps even something of a war hero as he just returned from a long absence. So perhaps he's something of a warrior in his own right. But I don't know that. He's also pretty brave, moving right past a gathering of women just to pursue Cinderella. That's, that's pretty bold of him, And then finally, Prince Philip. Okay, that one's easier. I mean, come on, the dude's brave as hell. Gets captured by Maleficent, gets help breaking free, and then braves an army of goblins, a thorn forest, and then a dragon to save her. He's pretty selfless, putting his own life and safety at risk just for other people. Yeah, I'd say he's a straight-up hero. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, just because you can't read the subtlety of characters doesn't mean they don't have any. Okay, now, I know what you're trying to say, though. The three princes here, you're arguing, are underdeveloped compared to the female protagonist. But the reason for that is simple. The story is about those female protagonists, and the princes are either the hero, in the case of Philip, or the ultimate goal or desire of the princess. It's actually kind of ironic how everyone gets on men saying that we objectify women in our modern storytelling, but in all three of these movies, wouldn't the reverse be the case? These men are, as you put it, only noted for their good looks and rich status. Is that not objectifying them?
Trick question. They have no personality. How much do we know about Prince Charming other than his royal pedigree and apparently poor facial recognition? Is he a vegetarian? Is he allergic to mice? Does he swear in front of his mother? Okay, we know Snow White loves making pies and has a great singing voice. We know Ariel is a hoarder and hates her dad. We know Belle reads dirty novels and is a furry. But we don't even know if Beast can read? What message does this send to little boys? That women don't care who they are as long as they agree to marry them? I mean, I can't help but think it's not gonna lead to a lot of happily ever afters.
I'm sorry, honey, but all the movies you mentioned kind of contradict your claim here. You say that the message for little boys is that women won't care for who you are as long as you marry them. Untrue on all three examples given. In Snow White, the message for boys was not directed from the prince, but from the dwarves. They opened their home to Snow White, learned proper manners and cleanliness from her and the importance of honesty, as well as showed concern for her welfare. The prince was merely the final reward for Snow White, while the dwarves were the male figures who not only learned from Snow White, but benefited from her. The lessons were clear as day. In The Little Mermaid, Eric and Ariel dated before the marriage was even offered, and thus they built a relationship. And Ariel clearly wanted to know more about him. And he wanted to know about him, wanted to know what life on the surface was like. That's where the song Part of Your World comes from. She wanted to learn about him. All right, and then as for Beauty and the Beast, the entire point of the story was that Beast and Belle had to learn to understand each other. Belle had to see past the Beast's flaws and bestial nature just to see the good man underneath. The story was entirely about looking beneath the surface and understanding each other. There is no question of that.
This is not an exaggeration. Snow White dreams about the prince marrying her.
Someday my prince will come.
Even though she doesn't know anything about him. She sings about him before she even meets him, which means she sees him as an idea in her head and not as a real person. And then when he tries to introduce himself and, I don't know, maybe tell her like a little bit more about who he is, she runs away like a lunatic. Probably because men are better seen than heard or something.
Alright, this is stupid and a little manipulative. You're twisting around the songs here. So the first song that Snow White sings is where the prince finds her. Is not, it's not Someday My Prince Will Come. The first song she sings is I'm Wishing, which is just a song where she sings into a well. She sings her wish that the man she loves will find her today. Not the prince necessarily, but just the man that loves her will find her.
I'm wishing for the one I love.
Just like any little girl would do. Like, can't you imagine a little girl wishing about her prince coming someday? Regardless of that, she did not expect anyone to show up, but the prince heard her singing and showed up, and so she didn't expect him to show up in the castle, so she runs in fright because she doesn't know who he is. Now, the song you played was a song she sang later to the dwarves, called Someday My Prince Will Come. In this song, she's telling the dwarves about her dream and desire to see the prince again, and how she hopes that they'll be able to run away together and be wed. Now, yes, she doesn't know the prince well yet, but it is entirely common for us to fantasize about our future spouses. I often imagine what my future wife may be like, or what kind of family I may have in the future. There's nothing weird or uncommon about that. Snow White is doing what millions of little girls do when they dream of Prince Charming coming to sweep them off their feet. There's nothing wrong with this scene.
Oh no, if I get to know this guy, I might not like him, and then how will I marry him? Ugh, better hold him up to some unrealistic standard of gentleman in my head and then pick a fight with him when it turns out he's not at all who I tried to force him to be.
That has nothing to do with Snow White, but I will admit that's a common problem with how some women treat men. I will grant you that. Lots of women do force high expectations on men and then treat them like shit when they can't be perfect. Now, men do the same thing to women too, make no mistake of that. They certainly do. And that is why compromise in marriage is so important. You date and get to know your spouse before you marry, so you learn kind of who they are, what to expect from them, and then when you're prepared to make that commitment, you marry them. Yes, there are difficulties. Yes, there are arguments and issues, as will always happen, but if you love someone and you know them, you can definitely move past them. So while this isn't a problem with Disney, I'd say it's more common an issue in relationships overall. So not really wrong, but just needed some explanation there.
And then there's Sleeping Beauty. She meets Prince Philip in the woods while she's fantasizing about falling in love.
I know you, I walked with you once upon a dream.
Much like Snow White, Aurora already has an idea in her head of what falling in love is supposed to be like. So we're basically telling little boys that you just have to be in the right place at the right time and you'll get the girl, regardless of who you are. There's no need to develop a personality, just learn how to stalk someone until you catch them dancing alone in the woods.
You know, Cracked must have some impressive gymnasts because that was an incredible stretch. So, you mind telling me how you got to that point? You start by saying Aurora has a preconceived idea as to what love is thanks to her song Once Upon a Dream, and that's true, she has a preconceived idea, we all do. We all imagine what love might look like, whether we're wrong or right about it. But then you jump to Philip and say that his message to little boys is that personality is irrelevant, just be in the right place at the right time and stalk a girl in the woods to get the girl, right? Okay, so first of all, Philip was not stalking her. He saw her singing about love, stepped out of the shadows to share in her dance and song. It's not a message about being in the right place at the right time. It's a message about what you do when confronted with the opportunity to be assertive and make a move. I mean, consider this for a second. Consider this. What else could Philip have done in that scenario? I mean, he could have stayed hidden and never acted, could have moved on, or he could have followed her home like a real stalker. Hell, you know, he could have just thrown himself on her and raped her right there, couldn't he? But instead, he does none of those things. He approaches, he sings with her, engaging in her own activity, and dances with her, allowing her to feel comfortable with him and not once violating her trust or safety. Is that not a better lesson for boys to take? And don't test me on this. I played in Sleeping Beauty. Granted, I didn't play Philip, but you know what? Let's not worry about the past. Let's move on. Let's not worry about that. Moving on.
Speaking of which, the princes are actively encouraged to take advantage of the princesses and engage in behavior that isn't totally not assault. I mean, Sleeping Beauty is like an obvious one because you can't consent if you're sleeping.
Okay, why do people keep saying this? Why do people keep making this dumb argument? It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. She will sleep forever if not kissed. I don't get this. What's Philip supposed to do? Just say, well, wouldn't want to kiss you without consent, so guess I'll leave you this way. Yeah, I'm sure she'll be real grateful for that. As the years pass and she eventually dies in her sleep and goes to heaven, she can say with a surety, well, I may have died, but at least no one kissed me without my consent. I will never understand this idiotic reasoning. What about if a person nearly drowned and needs mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? Should I ask the unconscious person for consent first or let them die? Like, if you have the ability to save someone, but it, like, violates their personal space, come on. Like, I don't know. I will never get this. And I've heard it a lot. That's the problem. I've heard this so frequently from feminists and leftist ideologues saying, oh, well, this kiss is a bad message to boys because it violates her consent. He's saving her life! Move on.
But even in The Little Mermaid, the sea creatures shame Prince Eric for not being more aggressive with Ariel on the lagoon. You know that frustration you feel watching that scene, wondering why he won't just kiss her already? Did you ever think that the reason he didn't immediately, as the prince, grab this mute, defenseless girl and kiss her was because maybe he wants to make sure it's, like, consensual?
They weren't shaming him. No, the sea creatures and Sebastian weren't shaming anyone. They were encouraging him to make a move. Eric right now is on a date with her, okay? And she can't talk. The singing is all meant to set the mood to make it more romantic so that they will kiss. Because a kiss is what Ariel needs to stay human. They aren't shaming him. They're saying, hey, if you wait too long and don't take action soon, you may miss your chance. And that's a decent lesson. Sometimes, even in relationships, it's important to act. See an opening that works and take it. Now, of course, I'm not saying to kiss someone if they don't want it, obviously. But how can you progress your relationship if you don't do anything? The scene was in need of a bit of spice, so the sea creatures added it. There was no shaming, and the message is not to violate consent. In fact, if you want the truth, he had Ariel's consent. She really, really wanted him to kiss her. That was kind of the whole motivation. She really, really wanted this, okay? To put it in a different perspective, let's say that if she didn't get kissed, like in this instance, if she didn't get kissed, she'd turn back into a mermaid. Let's change it. If she didn't get kissed, she'd turn into a sea slug, or turn into a turtle, or turn into a frog. Like, let's say that she didn't get kissed, that's her fate. Don't you think maybe she would be a little bit more like, come on, kiss me, damn it. You know, I'm feeling like there was a bit of urgency to this. They were running out of time. The sea creatures were trying to move things along. I get why they did it. She couldn't vocalize what she wanted. Eric had to be hinted to do it. If anything, I feel like Ariel should have been the one who was more assertive, okay? I feel like that should have been the bigger criticism here. But often, you know something? Here's the thing. Reason why Ariel wasn't more assertive? Because usually in society, back then and today, men are encouraged to be the assertive ones. Men are the ones expected to ask out girls, expected to pay for dates or meals, expected to propose, expected to be the money makers. Men are the ones who are usually expected to take action first. Imagine how hard it is to be a guy and to walk on eggshells like that. Do you act or do you not? If we act too soon and without thinking, the girl may reject us, go, ew, get away, you creep. If we don't act at all, well, maybe the girl takes that as a sign that we're not interested and they move on. We play a difficult game of love, my friends, in a game in which girls judge our performance. We are not unlike wild animals performing mating rituals in which men compete and perform for women's approval. So Eric being shy and uncertain and not sure what to do but still trying to be nice, that makes total sense. I mean, the whole bit where he's trying to be like, where he's trying to make jokes and try to guess her name, he's still playing up the, hey, I'm friendly, we're cool, right? We're still on good terms, right? We're still friendly with each other, but he doesn't want to cross that line because he's worried about what it would mean if that's not what she wanted, and she's not saying yes, she's not saying no. Do you see how Eric must feel? Look at it from his perspective. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, it's just... Good on you, Sebastian. You did the right thing here, bro.
Also, these Disney princes are all hot boys. Do they all have to be hot boys? Sure, the Disney princesses all have tiny waists and like a decent B cup, but if we're gonna criticize Disney for setting these standards for women, we should talk about the men too. All of these princes are CrossFit bros. I mean, Eric can row, dive, swim, Aladdin does parkour, and Prince Philip literally has to fight a dragon. How is that a useful skill?
Excuse you, I fight dragons daily as part of my job. This is a fundamental skill every man should know. And really? You're gonna say that not all Disney princes should be attractive? Alright, so how would an overweight slob prince sell? Just curious, how do you think young girls would feel about that? Because you are aware that in most of these movies, Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, you know who their audience is. It's not little boys. It's little girls. And most little girls like the very good-looking men. You yourself praised Aladdin earlier for his solid abs and said you wanted to trust him because of that. If Aladdin didn't have that nice physique, would you still want to trust him? Be honest with me here. Don't contradict yourself now.
None of the Disney princes have any motivation beyond getting a girl. Even Aladdin, arguably the most actualized prince, just wants to be a prince so he can rub Jasmine's magic lamp. At least the Disney princesses sing about wanting to escape their provincial lives or be part of some other world.
Alright, yes, you may have a point there. I'll grant you that. Many of the Disney princes that you mentioned do just want to get the girl. I'll give you that. But there's nuance. You gotta admit there's nuance. Like in the case of Aladdin, he wanted to way out of his poverty and peasant life as a street rat, and Beast wanted to be human again. So there's nuance, there's context, but I also want to talk a little bit about what most men want. What do most men want? It's really not that complicated for a lot of us. For a lot of men, we want companionship. I mean, okay, look, we joke about simping to women, right? We joke about that all the time. Oh, you're such a simp. I've heard the jokes. But there are genuinely men who crave female attention and female affection. And so we work tirelessly to get it. Like I said earlier, we are not so different from wild animals in competition to impress and win the hearts of future spouses. Men often define success not only in their job or in their status, but in their family and in the fact that they found a Miss Wonderful in their life. I could probably do a whole rant or ramble about this kind of thing, but we'll save it for another day. I've rambled on too long as it is. But think about it like this. I'll use this example and then I'll move on. A man who's a CEO of a company may be well respected and well liked and well off. That's great. But when he goes home alone, for him, that might not be worth the 7 figures he makes. For a lot of men, we long for relationship. We long for affection and attention. Ladies who watch my videos, if you're out there, if I do have any ladies watching my videos, take this from me. I'm a straight man, and I say this with 100% honesty. There are countless men who would run through hell for you just for a smile. So when you say the prince's only motivation is to get a woman, I would argue that's a totally valid and understandable motive for a lot of these men to have.
They're dreaming bigger than any prince does. And before you tell me that Peter Pan didn't want to grow up, he does not count. He is a child. And while we're on the subject, Simba doesn't count either. He's a lion. I want my son to model himself after a real adult human cartoon character, okay? So let's recap. Disney teaches men that they don't need to have personalities as long as they're hot.
Oh, please come back. I don't even know your name. How will I find you?
How do you dance all night and not, like, introduce yourself? You must be boring.
He's so boring. Yes, he's boring. That's why Cinderella lost track of time and forgot she needed to leave. Yeah, really boring guy there. Look, if you can keep a girl interested in you long enough they forget about curfew, you're doing something right.
Disney teaches men that the only motivation you need in life is to get the girl.
What about Beast literally letting Belle go for her own welfare? He learned to sacrifice what he wanted for her. Then when she came back, he said maybe it was better that he died and not made her life miserable. Or what about Quasimodo? Sure, I mean, he's not a prince, but he didn't get the girl. I mean, but he got acceptance. I want to know, what's wrong with wanting female companionship? You keep saying it like all they want is to get the girl. Well, yes, what's wrong with that? Do you want the guy to just give up on the girl? What's the goal here? Are you telling little boys not to pursue love? If the message is to pursue women that you love, and you say that's wrong, what message do you prefer? Would you prefer boys not pursue romance? Would you prefer boys not pursue women? Imagine for a moment if we had a prince like in Sleeping Beauty who, rather than wanting to save Aurora, said, oh, once he's captured, like he's like, hold on, Maleficent, let me go. Like, oh, I can't let you go. You'll save Aurora. No, seriously, I don't want anything to do with her. Like, she is not my motivation. She was kind of a fun fling, but I'm really I'm not all that interested. Wouldn't you call him a jerk? Wouldn't you say that's a little bit awful of him? What about Cinderella? When Cinderella runs away from the ball and the prince never gets his name, what if he just went, oh, well, she was a nice fling. Well, I got a whole crowd of women here still wanting me, so later, whoever you were, I'll go with one of these ladies. You'd call him an asshole, wouldn't you? What's wrong with a guy wanting the girl? I don't understand this rationale.
And even when you get the girl, she only likes you because of an idea in her head and not because of who you really are.
Methinks you read way too into this.
Disney also teaches men to be aggressive when it comes to making a move. Lie, stalk, pressure them, whatever it takes to get the job done.
I wish for you to make me a prince.
All right! Yo, yo, woo, woo. Okay, yes, Aladdin lied, but... Okay, before we get to that, who stalked? Who pressured? What prince from this repertoire pressured or stalked anyone? I mean, the only example I can think of is in Princess and the Frog, when Prince Naveen tried to pressure Tiana into kissing him so that he could turn back to normal, and in return, he would give her the money she needed for her restaurant. But one, he was lying about that, and two, that wasn't really pressuring her into a romance. He was pressuring her into giving him something he needed. In fact, he didn't pressure her in the romance. He was willing to give up being with her just so that she could give her her dream. Where are you getting those? Where's the pressure and stalked coming from? Where's that what prince stalked his prince? I don't get it. I don't get it. And then, okay, the Aladdin lying thing. Yes, Aladdin lied, but the film did not encourage that as a message. In fact, Genie encourages Aladdin to tell the truth. Aladdin needs to be honest. The lie hurts him in his connections. The message of the movie was not that boys should lie to get the girl. I'm sorry that you misunderstood a children's movie, Cracked. Why don't y'all go back to grade school and eat less crayons?
The only man in Disney princess movies I care for is the hunter in Snow White. Now that is a real man.
Forgive me. I beg of your highness.
He's not only average looking, but he also has his own agency and saved Snow White's life and like didn't get weird with her in the woods or anything. Can you imagine if he was a prince? He'd probably have tried to kiss her and she would have liked it. And that's not victim blaming, that is Disney blaming.
The hunter in Snow White? Really? That's what you're into? Okay. I mean, there's a lid for every jar, I suppose. I just didn't expect that the jar would be horseradish sauce.
Anyways, the hunter's chill. We should all be more like the hunter. Even though 100% he would have killed Snow White if she wasn't hot. So, I don't know. Just don't have kids, I guess. Oh, I don't have kids. Who wants to party?
This was dumb. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I know this was a weird video, and according to some of y'all, I probably shouldn't have even responded to it, but a part of me wanted to, because when I first saw it, I thought, I'm just going to skip this. I'm not going to respond to it. But then I really thought about it, and something occurred to me. We don't talk about the Disney princes enough, and when this woman was starting to talk about how the princes need to be better so that they can be better role models for kids, I realized three things. Number one, we don't have enough good role models for boys these days anymore. I really think that needs to change. Like I said earlier in my rant, and I won't go on another one, I'm just going to say this. I really do think that boys could benefit from having a strong male role model in their life. I'd prefer it not to be a cartoon, granted. I'd prefer it to be a father, or a teacher, or an educator, or a family friend, or an uncle, or someone who can raise this boy to be a proper young man in society. But I do agree that young boys do need strong male role models. The second thing I realized is, while I know that she's been joking throughout this whole video, and this whole video is taken as a joke, I feel like Disney princes do need some recognition. Especially in the case of ones like Philip in Snow White. Philip in Sleeping Beauty, or Aladdin, or Eric, or any of these princes who risk their lives or well-being to help someone in need. Like, you know, it's kind of funny. I brought him up earlier, but I'm going to give Naveen some props from Princess and the Frog. One thing that really surprised me about that is he was in love with Tiana, but was willing to give up a relationship with her so that he could give her the restaurant she's always dreamed of. He was going to give up his happiness so that she could have what she always wanted. And keep in mind, he wasn't really risking his life to do that. All he had to do was kiss a girl that he doesn't love and get into marriage with her. He was willing to give up his happiness for her. That's actually really big. Like, it's not the same as fighting a dragon, granted, but that's still a big deal. Give credit where credit's due. You know, it's people were always praising Frozen, you know, because of its big defile of norm. Like, oh, it wasn't a prince who saved the day. It wasn't true love's kiss that saved the day. It was sisterly love. Cool, I guess, but I think it's way more interesting when you have someone who's willing to give up some of who they are for someone else. You know, that's what I've always been drawn to. And while I don't think Frozen did that too poorly, I think people were drawn to something different. I admired the fact that Anna ran in the way to take the sword for Elsa. That's what I admired, not the hug that brought her back. The same way I admire Naveen for willingly going to get married to a girl he doesn't love for the sake of someone else. Self-sacrifice, I think, is the recipe for true love, not, you know, hugs and kisses. And then thirdly, and the last thing that I'll bring up, I love cartoons and Disney and childish stuff. I don't know what that says about me. I know a lot of people do, but genuinely, I love them. And I think that you can take a lot of messages from them. The movies that were mentioned here, like Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Aladdin, all these movies, they have a lot to share. The princes, the princesses, the side characters, they have a lot to teach us. I think the idea that saying the princes or the princesses need to be better by any stretch often neglects what they're trying to tell us. Like, people who say that princesses are nothing but damsels in need of rescuing. Are you missing the forest for the trees, my friend? There are lots of lessons you can take from Snow White, other than she just needs to be rescued. Think of what she taught the dwarves. Think of what the dwarves learned from her. Cleanliness, how to take care of themselves, how to take pride in their appearance, how to be honest. That was something she taught them. I liked that. In Cinderella, she taught loving people lesser than you are and realizing that even though times may be difficult for you, continuing to dream and push and aspire to something better will often give you something better than yourself. In fact, one thing that I find interesting is Walt Disney said that Cinderella was one of his favorites because it was all about a character who was going through a rough time but had an opportunity to make something better for themselves and took it, and it did turn out great, which was, he felt, was his story. And that's something you can take from Cinderella. And then Sleeping Beauty. Yes, Sleeping Beauty kind of minces around and dances and doesn't quite understand what love is, but we also have messages from Prince Philip rising against adversity and fighting against evil against all odds. And we learn from Aurora that quite often hiding from your problems doesn't fix anything. I remember Jordan Peterson doing a whole lecture on Sleeping Beauty, which I'm not going to go into here. I've already talked long enough. This video is way longer than it needs to be, and I am terribly sorry for that. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope that this wasn't a total waste of time for you guys. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.